Before you scroll, before you doubt, before you brush this off, pause. Because what I'm about to say isn't just to give information. It's about a transformation for your life. Listen, these affirmations, they're just more than words. They are declarations of war against everything that told you that you had to stay broken, stay bound, stay buried beneath someone else's story. These aren't just affirmations, they're excavations, rituals of release, root work for the soul. Each one of these declarations is a key unlocking the chains your ancestors never had the chance to break. This is sacred ground, not just survival soil. Here, we don't just prune the branches, we dig deep into the roots. Generational trauma is sneaky. It wears many names: silence, shame, fear, doubt, and struggle. It shows up in the ways we love, lead, lash out, or even shut down. But what was passed down can be unlearned. What was inherited can be healed, and what was broken can be rebuilt in bold, beautiful, breathtaking ways. You see, trauma has a voice, and it repeats itself through behaviors, beliefs, and bloodlines. And if trauma can repeat, then guess what? So can the truth. Every time you repeat these affirmations, you're not just speaking. You're rewriting the language your mind and spirit respond to. You're interpreting the old script and inserting a new soundtrack. You're saying to your inner child, your future self, and your bloodline, this cycle ends with me and something royal begins right here and right now. Repetition is how we learn the lie. And now repetition is how we'll remember the truth. So don't just say it once. Say it until your nervous system believes it. Say it until shame gets tired of fighting you. Say it until your blood stops flinching at love. Say it until you walk like someone who knows they've been crowned in healing. Every time you repeat these affirmations, you are planting royal seeds. And darling, something powerful is about to grow. So let's start the repeating so we can start rising. Now let's begin. I was taught to stay silent to survive, but now I speak boldly to thrive. I inherited fear as my first language, but now I fluently speak faith. I was raised on guilt and shame, but now I rise in grace and healing. I was taught love must be earned, but now I know I am loved simply because I exist. I grew up in the echo of criticism. I now speak words that build and bless. I watch people settle for less, but now I reach for everything with my name on it. I was told not to cry, but now I let my tears water my growth. I learned to please to feel safe, but now I please God, not people, and I'm still safe. I was taught struggle equals worth, but now I believe joy is sacred and deserved. I saw anger as the only outlet, but now I choose peace as my power. I inherited silence around pain, but now I tell the truth and set myself free. I was taught perfection is love, but now I embrace my flaws as part of my humanity. I watch love used as control, but now I love with freedom and boundaries. I was shamed for being emotional, but now I honor my heart and feel deeply. I never saw real affection, but now I give and receive love with ease. I inherited broken patterns, but now I build new legacies. I was told just get over it. But now I give myself time, grace, and space. I watch people suffer in silence, but now I ask for help with confidence. I was raised on survival, but now rise in stability and abundance. I inherited debt and lack, but I now plant wealth and wisdom. I saw faith twisted in fear. I now walk boldly with truth and love. I inherited distrust in relationships, but now I form healthy, whole connections. I learned betrayal was something normal, but now I choose loyalty, beginning with myself. I was taught to be small, but now I take up space like I was born to. I inherited anger as a response, but now I pause, breathe, and choose intention. I saw love tied to pain, but now I tie love to peace, joy, and respect. I inherited the lie that I'm not enough, but now I affirm I am more than worthy. I was told not to dream big, but I now live like miracles belong to me. I inherited denial as a coping skill. I now face truth with courage and grace. I was taught emotions were weakness, but I now honor emotions as sacred wisdom. I was told money is evil. I now believe money is a tool for good. I inherited the pattern of staying stuck, but I now move forward with purpose. I watched people stay in toxic cycles, but I now break the chain and create new chapters. I was taught my voice didn't matter, but I now speak with divine authority. I inherited sickness as a lifestyle, but I now live in a radical self-care. I was told to fear love. I now embrace love as my birthright. I saw pride without healing, but I now choose humility and wholeness. I was taught to ignore red flags, but I now trust my intuition and act on wisdom. I inherited pain in my body. I now breathe in healing and release the trauma. I watched people give up. I now finish what I start with strength. I was taught love means sacrifice of self. I now love without losing me. I inherited abandonment. I now choose connection and consistency. I grew up in emotional poverty. I now live in emotional abundance. I inherited family secrets. I now live in transparent truth. I was taught boundaries were disrespectful, but I now see boundaries as love in action. I inherited coping through addictions. I now cope through healing and honesty. I was told asking for help is weakness. I now know asking for help is strength. I learned pain is normal. I now normalize joy. I saw women silenced. I now speak and lead with boldness. I saw men crushed by pressure. I now free myself to feel and be. I was told not to trust anyone. I now trust wisely and love openly. I inherited the belief I must be tough. I now believe softness is sacred as well. I saw apology withheld. I now apologize and heal forward. I learned to tolerate dysfunction. I now choose peace over patterns. I inherited grief with no language. I now name it, feel it, and heal it. I saw ambition shamed. I now shine without shrinking. I learned not to rest, but I now rest, restore, and rise again. I inherited pressure, to perform. I now live in the freedom of just being. I saw connection replaced with chaos. I now anchor in calm and care. I learned rage before I learned love. I now love with clarity and conviction. I inherited fear around intimacy. I now invite connection with courage. I was taught to keep everything inside, but I now express myself fully and safely. I saw dreams die quietly, but I now breathe life into purpose. I inherited judgment, but now I choose compassion. I saw power abused, but I now wield power with love and justice. I was told emotions are too much, but I now know their divine guidance. I inherited self-doubt. I now walk in self-trust. I watched women carry everything, and I now share the load and honor my limits. I saw men break under silence, but I now break the silence to be whole. I inherited the trauma of religion without love, but I now walk in faith rooted in grace. I saw promises broken, but I now keep my word and heal my lineage. I inherited unhealthy attachments, but I now detach from chaos and attach to peace. I was taught to be ashamed of my story, but I now share it with power and purpose. I saw bodies punished instead of honored. I now treat mine like the temple it is. I inherited small thinking, but I now think and live expansively. I saw loyalty to pain, but I now commit to healing. I was taught to endure dysfunction, but now I choose alignment over obligation. I inherited patterns of hiding, but now I live in the light of authenticity. I learned that love had to hurt. I now know real love heals. I was raised to suppress identity, but I now live out loud, true and free. I inherited scarcity. I now overflow with divine provision. I watched avoidance win. I now face things and free myself. I was taught never to question authority. I now ask, challenge, and awaken. I saw resilience confused with repression. I now heal openly and live fully. I inherited unworthiness, but I now walk in undeniable value. I saw men taught to be providers but not present. I now know presence is the most sacred provision. I inherited tension as normal, but I now live in ease. I saw celebration withheld, but I now celebrate myself and others boldly. I inherited pressure to always be strong, but I now honor my vulnerability. I watch cycles repeat again and again, but I now create divine disruptions. I learned love had conditions, but I now love and am loved unconditionally. I inherited burnout, but I now choose balance. I saw parents pour out empty, but I now pour from a full cup. I inherited the belief that my voice had no power, but now I roar with truth and tenderness. I was taught to fear healing, but now I embrace it with arms wide open. I saw generations suffer silently, but I now speak release and rebuild. I inherited patterns of control, but I now trust life and surrender what I cannot change. I learned family meant pain, but I now redefine family as love, respect, and safety. I inherited numbness, but I now feel and flourish. I saw trauma pass like tradition, but now I pass peace, joy, and purpose instead. I inherited the habit of hiding my needs, but I now name my needs and meet them without guilt. I learned to chase approval to feel enough. I now anchor in knowing I was always enough. I was taught love is earned through pain, but I now receive love without sacrifice or self. I saw anger explode, not express. I now express my emotions with clarity and care. I inherited spiritual fear, not freedom. I now walk with faith that liberates. I saw men fear vulnerability, but I now lead with honesty and emotional courage. I inherited codependency as connection. I now choose healthy interdependence. I was told family always comes first, even when it hurts. But I now believe boundaries are love too. I inherited chronic self-blame, but I now release what was never mine to carry in the first place. I saw apology used to manipulate, but I now use truth to repair and restore. I was raised to be tough and not tender, but I now honor the strength and softness. I inherited unspoken grief. I now give my sorrow words and space to breathe. I watch conflict avoided at all cost. I now face it with grace and growth. I inherited exhaustion as achievement. I now rest and reclaim my energy. I was taught to be strong instead of being real. I now choose honesty over image. I saw women shrink for peace. I now expand unapologetically. I inherited the fear of becoming my parents, but I now become fully myself with love and awareness. I watch men numb their pain in silence. I now speak and feel with honor. I learned to mask my sadness with performance. I now let my soul be seen without the act. I was taught power is control. I now know true power is self-mastery. I inherited broken love stories. I now write a new one rooted in truth and tenderness. I saw punishment used instead of parenting. I now lead with guidance and not fear. I inherited the fear of rest. I now rest deeply without guilt. I learned to carry emotions that weren't mine. I now return them to the sender with love. I saw emotional needs neglected. I now prioritize my inner well-being. I was taught pain is private. I now know healing is communal. I inherited shame around asking questions. I now lead with curiosity and truth-seeking. I was raised in emotional extremes. I now live in balanced calm. I saw dreams ridiculed. I now protect mine fiercely and pursue them freely. I inherited secrecy as a survival tool. I now choose transparency as my truth teller. I was taught worth comes from what I do. I now know I'm worthy just because I am. I saw success without joy. I now choose purpose with peace. I inherited the belief that suffering is noble. I now believe joy is holy. I watch survival replace softness. I now reclaim that right to be gentle and safe. I was taught emotions make you weak, but I now know emotions make you wise. I saw fear taught as protection. I now trust my discernment and truth. I inherited spiritual silence. I now commune with God openly and often. I saw men praise for disconnecting. I now celebrate connection and presence. I learned crisis as a lifestyle. I now welcome peace as my rhythm. I was taught to not need anyone. I now know true strength allows support. I saw people self-sacrifice to be loved. I now choose love that honors me fully. I inherited emotional shutdown. I now feel and process with safety. I was taught joy must be earned. I now live in joy as my natural state of being. I saw comparison weaponized. I now celebrate my unique becoming. I inherited a legacy of unfinished healing, but I now commit to the restoration of my entire bloodline. I was told I'm too much. I now know I'm exactly enough. I saw love withheld as punishment. I now love generously and wisely. I learned to ignore intuition. I now trust my spirit's knowing. I inherited constant survival mode. I now choose peace as my new normal. I was taught struggle is a badge of honor. I now honor rest, joy, and ease. I saw emotional labor expected, not appreciated. I now protect my emotional energy with pride. I inherited fear of abandonment. I now live rooted in divine security. I learned to expect pain in love. I now expect kindness, care, and clarity. I saw people break and pretend they were fine. I now break the silence, not myself. I inherited loud dysfunction. I now welcome quiet healing. I saw humor used to mask the trauma. I now laugh from healing, not hiding. I inherited lack as identity. I now live in fullness and overflow. I saw silence around abuse. I now speak truth even if my voice shakes. I inherited over responsibility. I now let go of what's not mine. I was taught love is scarce. I now know love is abundant and available. I learned to downplay my dreams. I now shout them from the rooftop of faith. I saw rejection shape identity. I now allow love to rebuild it. I inherited emotional detachment. I now embody warmth and presence. I was taught to wait my turn. I now take up space and move when called. I saw avoidance dressed as peace. I now face and fix with grace. I inherited instability. I now create sacred, steady spaces. I learned to normalize chaos. I now honor calm as my home. I saw intimacy feared. I now welcome closeness with care. I inherited the fear of being seen. I now shine without shrinking. I was taught to suffer quietly. I now heal loudly and live freely. I saw disconnection passed down. I now create conscious connection. I inherited fear of failure. I now dance with growth in every lesson. I was taught to dismiss emotions. I now honor them as divine messengers. I saw mistrust normalized. I now build bridges with healthy trust. I inherited the fear of not being enough. I now know I am more than worthy. I was raised in emotional shutdown. I now live emotionally awake and aware. I saw adults become children emotionally. I now lead from maturity and love. I inherited broken communication. I now speak life and listen well. I was taught success means sacrifice of self. I now succeed without losing me. I saw truth punished. I now speak truth with protection and pride. I inherited grief as legacy. I now build joy as the new inheritance. I saw people prove themselves to be loved. I now receive love without performance. I inherited relationship dysfunction. I now co-create harmony and healing. I saw loyalty cost identity. I now stay loyal to my soul. I was taught to feel unsafe in my own body. I now reclaim my body as my home. I inherited stories I never agreed to. I now write new ones with power and purpose.